Hello, good morning, and welcome to our special coverage of the Russian invasion. I'm Olumide Macaulay. The headlines. Multiple explosions reported in Kyiv late on Monday night. Secretary of Russia's Security Council, Nikolai Patrushev, warns Russia has the weapons to destroy the U.S. if threatened. Plus, Russia fails to get Nord Stream gas inquiry at United Nations meeting. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. The mayor of Kyiv, Vitaly Klitschko, says multiple explosions were reported in Kyiv last night. Klitschko said on his Telegram explosions in the capital, initially in Obolon and other residential districts, all services are being sent to the scene. In one of the districts, fire and rescue services are responding to the scene of a building fire. Preliminarily, there are no casualties. However, the Kyiv Regional Military Administration says the city's air raid sirens were activated ahead of the explosions. The Secretary of Russia's Security Council, Nikolai Patrushev, warned that his country has the weapons to destroy any enemy, including the United States, if its own existence is threatened. Patrushev says, in his words, American politicians trapped by their own propaganda remain confident that in the event of a direct conflict with Russia, the United States is capable of launching a preventive missile strike, after which Russia will no longer be able to respond. Adding that Russia is patient and does not intimidate anyone with its military advantage, but it has modern, unique weapons capable of destroying any adversary, including the United States, in the event of a threat to its existence. Meanwhile, the continued supply of weapons to Ukraine from the West could trigger a serious escalation in the conflict with Russia. That's according to a German lawmaker who urges for an immediate ceasefire and negotiations to bring an end to the bloodshed. Commenting on the continuing conflict, which has now entered its 14th month, Sevim Dahlgren, a member of the German Bundestag, says that the eastward expansion by the US-led NATO caused the situation to erupt last year and believes the ongoing delivery of deadly weapons to Ukraine by Western countries is only adding more fuel to the fire.
Die USA und die NATO ihr Versprechen an Russland, nämlich die NATO nicht in
The US and NATO broke their promise to Russia that NATO would continue to expand eastward. Meanwhile, Ukraine kept moving closer to NATO, and Ukraine was already very deeply integrated militarily with NATO. If we keep sending heavy weapons to Ukraine, the current conflict could escalate into World War III. So it is urgent that we must reach ceasefire immediately and carry out negotiations unconditionally.
Deshalb ist es ganz, ganz wichtig, dass wir jetzt endlich einen Waffenstillstand haben und verhandeln.
German Chancellor Olaf Scholz says Germany has delivered promised Leopard battle tanks to Ukraine, providing Kyiv with much-needed heavy weaponry against Russia. A press conference in Rotterdam, Netherlands. There, Mr. Scholz said, quote, yes, we delivered Leopard tanks as we announced. According to security sources, besides the 18 main battle tanks, 40 German Marder infantry fighting vehicles and 2 armored recovery vehicles have also reached Ukraine. Meanwhile, Belarus Defense Ministry released a video showing a training exercise involving an air defense unit armed with Russian-supplied Tor M2K missile launchers. The drill comes after Russian President Vladimir Putin unveiled plans to station Russian tactical nuclear weapons in Belarus, claiming it was a response to an announcement by the United Kingdom that it will hand over ammunition with depleted uranium to Ukrainian forces. Now, according to Belarusian and Russian defense sources, the system is capable of bringing down a variety of enemy targets, including cruise missiles, glided bombs, drones, and aircraft. And a Belarus opposition leader says Russia's decision to station tactical nuclear weapons in neighboring Belarus aims to subjugate Belarus and violate its constitution. Discussing the situation, she called Belarusian leader Alexander Lukashenko a full accomplice in the war who fulfills all the orders of Putin. She also claimed that Mr. Lukashenko can't take credit for the fact that Belarusian troops haven't been sent to Ukraine. According to her, Mr. Lukashenko is responsible for crimes of aggression against Ukraine and has to be called a sponsor of terrorism. The opposition leader noted that Belarus is overlooked at the moment due to the conflict in Ukraine, and not all the politicians understand the role of Belarus in regional peace and security. She also emphasizes that people of Belarus are fighting not only against Lukashenko's regime, but also against a hybrid co-occupation of Russia in Belarus. NATO troops held exercises on the Romanian coast, drilling evacuation tactics close to the Ukrainian border. Naval forces practiced evacuating civilians from coastal areas in the Danube Delta, an area bordering Ukraine's Odessa region. Odessa has been the site of numerous missile strikes since Russia launched a full-scale invasion of just over a year ago. The drills in Romania are part of the Sea Shield 23 exercises involving 3,400 troops from countries across the NATO alliance, including the United States and the United Kingdom. However, the exercises are due to continue until April the 4th. Russia has failed to get the UN Security Council to ask for an independent inquiry into explosions in September on the Nord Stream gas pipeline connecting Russia and Germany that spewed gas into the Baltic Sea. Only Russia, China, and Brazil voted in favor of the Russian-drafted text, while the remaining 12 council members abstained. A resolution needs at least 9 votes in favor and no vetoes by Russia, China, France, and the United States or Britain to pass. Russia proposed the draft resolution last month, just days before the first anniversary of its invasion of Ukraine.
Without an objective and transparent international investigation, the truth will not be uncovered as to what happened. Therefore, Russia openly and constructively is proposing to our colleagues in the Council that they adopt the resolution, which instructs the United States Secretary General to make proposal on establishing an international independent commission to conduct a comprehensive, transparent, and impartial investigation into what happened. This is particularly important given the emergence of new facts and also the growing number of media versions as to what happened, with differing degrees of absurdity and reliability.
The United States categorically refutes Russia's unfounded allegations leveled against us in relation to this act of sabotage. The United States was not involved in any way. Period. As we have said previously, the international community cannot tolerate any deliberate actions to damage critical infrastructure. However, let us be clear on what Russia's draft resolution was and what it was not. It was an attempt to discredit the work of ongoing national investigations and prejudice any conclusions they reach that do not comport to Russia's predetermined and political narrative. It was not an attempt to seek the truth. The competent national investigations by Sweden, Denmark, and Germany are proceeding in a comprehensive, transparent, and impartial manner. As many council members have said, they must first be allowed to conclude. That is why we did not support this draft resolution and voted to abstain today.
Now, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy has met International Atomic Energy Agency Chief Rafael Grossi at a hydroelectric power plant in the southeastern city of Zaporizhia. A press release on the presidential office says Grossi and President Zelenskyy were informed about the measures taken to protect the Dnipro hydroelectric power plant in case of new attacks. Now, Grossi traveled to the area home to Europe's biggest nuclear power plant, which has been occupied by Russian forces for the past year and lies some 50 kilometers from Ukrainian-held Zaporizhia city. Mr. Zelenskyy told the head of the UN nuclear watchdog agency that safety at the Zaporizhia nuclear power station could not be guaranteed until Russian troops left the facility. Meanwhile, the Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelenskyy said in his nightly address that he'd visited buildings hit by Russian missiles in the southeastern Zaporizhia region. He also says the southern city of Dnipro had been a fortress since 2014 when pro-Russian separatists in the eastern region of Donbass declared independence and fighting broke out. Take a listen.
Today in Zaporizhia, I visited the sites where Russian rockets hit residential buildings. Ordinary houses, burnt, partially destroyed, unfortunately. Dozens of people were injured by this insane Russian strike. The terrorists knew precisely where they were aiming their missiles. High explosive smirch at houses. 37 people were injured. 2 died. My condolences to those who have lost loved ones. More than 400 people applied for help. Dnipro has been our fortress for more than 9 years, all this time supporting the frontline and warriors. It is here in Dnipro that since 2014, thousands of our soldiers have been saved after being wounded. Dnipro concentrated the work of volunteers from the first weeks of aggression in 2014.
Дніпро концентрував роботу волонтерів від перших тижнів агресії.
President of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelenskyy. Now let's speak with Andrzej Matysiak, Deputy Head of Foreign Desk Pravda newspaper. He joins us from Bratislava, Slovakia. Good morning. You're welcome to the program. Thank you for being with us.
Good morning.
Mr. Matysiak, I'm personally concerned. I wonder if you're of the same mind. So we have UK supplying Challenger tanks to the Ukraine. We have Germany supplying the Leopard tanks in fulfillment of their promise. We have soldiers coming back from the UK having trained in the use of the Challenger tanks from the UK, 12 of which have been supplied, 22 promised out of the UK's over 200 tank arsenal, if I may use that word. Is there a danger that these numbers are going to cause an escalation and these events are going to cause an escalation of this war?
Yes, you can say that, but let's define escalation. Russia started the war more than 1 year ago, and Ukraine is defending its territory, and of course trying to liberate the occupied territories. So it's quite obvious that Ukraine is trying to start some counter-offensive, and of course Ukraine needs weapons for this. So in a sense that Ukraine will be better able to defend its territory and also create some counterattacks. Yes, this is the escalation of the war. But I think this is pretty normal. It's hard for me to imagine that why Ukraine shouldn't be able to defend and also to counterattack. If you see for months now, attacks after attacks, for example, around Bakhmut and in other places from Russian side. So yes, it is in a sense an escalation, but I define the escalations as something which can really happen in the war. And this, in this case, Ukraine is simply trying to and Ukrainian armed forces are simply trying to do their duty to defend their country.
President Vladimir Putin has been painted by NATO and EU with the brush of being the archetypal, garden variety, despot leader, finger on the trigger of a nuclear arsenal that can deploy them if he is so threatened, but they don't believe that he's going to do so, but they want the world to know that he is this type of person. Now, to bring the war to an end, are these views from NATO and is this posture from the EU helping in any way to bring some mediation that can bring cessation of hostilities?
Can you please repeat the question, because I lost the audio for a sec.
Oh, sorry about that audio. But basically what I'm asking you is this. The Russian President Vladimir Putin has been painted as the person that is taking the war to Ukraine. That much is obvious. But in bringing the war to an end, do you think NATO and the EU should begin to play more of a mediatory role?
Look, I think that EU and NATO is, and especially EU, because, but also NATO, I think they're saying one clear thing. It's up to the Ukraine to set up the conditions for the negotiation and for ceasefire, because Ukraine is the victim of the invasion. Of course, I would agree that we might try to open as much diplomatic channels as possible. For example, there is you can say almost maybe not constant, but quite regular communication between Ankara and Moscow. And don't forget, of course, Turkey is the part of NATO, between President Erdogan and President Putin. So I think there are some small initiatives, but of course it doesn't help is from the beginning of the war that Mr. Putin and other Russian officials are quite regularly bragging about the nuclear weapons. Now we have heard this statement that Russia might send tactical nukes to Belarus, that they are building the facility there. I don't think this is going to change the picture that much. But of course, it's a step towards. Basically, I think that Russia is trying to blackmail us not to help Ukraine that much. I mean, the West, the EU, NATO, other countries. And it must be also said that it partly works. You asked me about the escalations, and I would argue that as much as we are supporting Ukraine, I mean, the West, we have been relatively cautious in escalating things. You know, all the weapon systems that were sent to Ukraine, that happened after the long discussions. I'm sure that Ukrainians would like to see them developing much more rapidly. But there was always a discussions about it, a long discussion. Don't forget about it. We started with javelins now, and after 1 year, we are to tanks. Also, some weapon systems that were sent to Ukraine, like artillery, they come with limitations. For example, Ukrainians cannot fire the special ammunition that could also hit the Russian territory and so on. So we are relatively cautious, and we are signaling Russia that this is really not about any grab of your territory. This is really about Ukraine defending its territory. And of course, Ukraine want to push Russian soldiers out of its own territory, as I said previously.
We know the role that propaganda plays in a war, where the war machines of countries in tandem with the foreign offices of those countries, for instance, in World War II, where the leaflets were dropped by Nazi Germany to sort of dampen the hearts of the opposition. In the case where we seem to know how many tanks Ukraine is getting, we seem to know how the training is going, we seem to know what weapons are being deployed, promised and delivered from Germany, from the UK and other countries to Ukraine. Doesn't that take away the advantage of the element of surprise?
Maybe yes, but it's interesting that Russia likes to talk about escalation and how we escalate things, but Russia is also somewhat cautious. You can find on internet an interesting clip from one of the interviews Russian President Putin did with the Russian journalist, and he was asked why Russia is not trying to, for example, destroy the Western deliveries, and there was a pretty strange answer from Mr. Putin that they are doing it secretly and in the night and so on. So either Russia has no means to destroy them, or Russia is also aware that Russia also is aware that any kind of this attack, for example, if some equipment would be coming from the NATO territory, would be also an escalation from the Russian side. So I think that both sides understands the risks. Sometimes those risks are a bit higher, but I think that with all the rhetoric, I do believe that for now, Russia is trying to absolutely avoid the direct confrontation with NATO countries. So this is kind of an equilibrium, and Russia cannot do much to stop the deliveries. Yes, the element of surprise, as you mentioned, might be a bit lost because they know what's coming, but we will see if the proof will be in the pudding, as they say. We will see if Ukraine, with the current weapon deliveries, with tanks, will be able to start any kind of successful counter-offensive. We don't know that. It's possible. Some experts are a little bit more optimistic. Some are less optimistic because you don't need not just tanks, but you need the combined armed forces maneuvers with artillery, with armed forces. So we will see. I think it's important for Ukraine to have those tanks, but you also have to use them. And if this will be enough to push Russians out, at least from some territories, we will see.
Finally, Mr. Matisak, you have the unique position of being the head of the foreign desk of the Pravda newspaper, so you have an ear to the pulse of the heart of the people in Slovakia, where you are. Can you quickly tell us how people are reacting to this war?
Slovakia is a bit unique case among NATO EU countries. We have at least some part of the population you can probably describe them as pro-Russian, so less willing to support Ukraine. There are also some political parties with those kinds of positions, and we are going to have elections in September. So I think there will be also the results of the elections will be a clear indicator of what voters want. So it will be, I think, quite interesting to follow Slovakia, because at this moment the Slovak government is very much supportive of Ukraine. After the elections, we might have a government that will be, let's put it that way, a bit more cautious. But we will see. We don't have a crystal ball. We also had just elections in Nigeria. So it's good to have a democracy because we don't know the result beforehand. So we will see.
Thank you so much for making the time to speak with us, Mr. Andrej Matisak, the Deputy Head of Foreign Desk, Pravda newspaper, joining us from Slovakia.
Thank you, Maj. Thanks for having me.
After the break, Ukraine to take part in US-led summit for democracy. Details in a moment. Please stay with us. Thanks for staying tuned and welcome back. A police chief in the Russian-controlled Ukrainian port city of Mariupol has survived an alleged assassination attempt when his car was blown up. According to Russian state media, TASS police chief Mikhail Moskvin, his car was blown up, but he was alive. He adds that he sustained light injuries. However, the state-owned RIA Novosti agency reported that the explosive device placed underneath Moskvin's car went off as he stood close to it, and that he did not have any need to be hospitalized. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy says Ukraine is taking part in the U.S.-led Summit for Democracy. President Zelenskyy did not provide additional details on his country's participation. The Summit for Democracy is a virtual summit hosted by the United States to renew democracy at home and confront autocracies abroad. The first summit was held on December the 9th to the 10th, 2021. Meanwhile, the Ukrainian ambassador to Switzerland said the Swiss foreign policy tradition of neutrality should not impede it from re-exporting weapons to Ukraine, which she says were urgently needed to defeat the Russian invasion. Speaking at the Ukrainian embassy in Bern, Irina Venediktova says that neutrality and the re-export of arms to Ukraine should be viewed as separate issues. Switzerland's government says earlier this month it will not change its long-standing policy banning any country that buys Swiss arms from sending them to the party of a conflict.
I have dialogue. Of course, I speak in all meetings about re-export, because for us very important to have weapon and ammunition. I respect Swiss neutrality, because Swiss neutrality is a pillar of Swiss state. The main power here in Switzerland, it is people. And I know when people decide to do something, and it will be their decisions, government and parliament will do, actually. That's why, yes, questions and these all discussions about re-exports, I have every day. And every day I stress that neutrality and re-export, it is absolutely different terms. We need this weapon and ammunition as fast as possible. It is a question of surviving our people, our nation, our state. We can't find any, question marks about this. Please let other countries help us. We don't ask, give your weapon to us directly. Not. We just ask not to block. Because actually, after the Second World War, international law, international humanitarian law was established as this possibility that actually victim can protect itself, third parties can't help protect victim and self, and actually all others should not contribute this crime, because crime of aggression, it is crime, and we are still living on crime of aggression. And I just ask not contribute crime of aggression. It's a question about signals. It's a question about position. And of course, the whole world is watching. And the whole world expects fair position, not more than fair position.
Meanwhile, Switzerland has abstained from voting at the United Nations Security Council for an independent probe into the Nord Stream pipeline blast, as it prefers to see first the results of an ongoing investigation led by Denmark, Germany, and Sweden. Swiss authorities said in a statement, in principle, UN investigations can add value, for example, in the absence of credible national investigations by competent authorities. In this specific case, investigations by Germany, Denmark, and Sweden are already underway. Switzerland considers it more appropriate to await the results of these investigations, while at the same time calling for rapid clarification of acts of sabotage. Now let's talk to Professor David Awurawa, the head of the Department of History and Strategic Studies, University of Lagos. Professor, it's good to have you on the program this morning.
Thank you for having me on the program.
I'd like us to begin with two comments. The first being the latter of the Switzerland's comments from the Secretary of the Ukrainian ambassador, beg your pardon, to Switzerland, who says that the Swiss foreign policy tradition of neutrality should, be set aside in the case of weapons supply to Ukraine. Given that this happens to be a foundation and bastion of Swiss foreign policy, don't you think, or do you think it's a tall order and the Swiss will hardly even consider what she's saying?
Well, we need countries like Switzerland in the international system. Their position to maintain neutrality at different times has been very useful in resolving international disputes. Because when violent conflict like this break out, we need countries that can intervene as impartial third parties. And when countries maintain neutrality like this, they build confidence. Countries are more comfortable with them when they try to take actions to bring conflicts to an end. It is true that countries like Ukraine would not like, positions like this, usually from a country, at the center of Europe. But it is something that people like us who analyze international affairs encourage, because everybody cannot be drawn into supporting one side or the other, at the end of which there will be nobody to, take measures to bring conflicts to an end. So the position of Switzerland is encouraged. We need more countries to maintain a neutral position, which does not mean that they do not support respect to international law and maintenance of global stability. But they maintain positions that enables them to be able to intervene decisively, even if they are small countries, they don't have so much power, at least present proposals that will help to bring conflicts to an end. So I see that position of Switzerland in positive light, despite the fact that, of course, we all condemn violation of international law and aggression against a peaceful country.
Yes, because they didn't support any country, or they remain neutral in the world wars of I and II, much less now that this is a situation that could be exacerbated by support for either country, given the unique position that Switzerland has. So what do you think informs the ambassador of Ukraine to Switzerland that she's trying to get this done or have this considered by Switzerland?
Well, as you said before, the foundation of the foreign policy of Switzerland is anchored on neutrality. Which was why for so many years Geneva was a place where a center for good offices. When countries struggle here and there, they can't find a place to go and negotiate because of lack of trust. They go to Switzerland and to some extent Vienna in Austria. So it's true that efforts will be made to pressurize Switzerland to go further in its support for Ukraine and all that. But the Swiss are trying to stay within the confines of the foundations of their foreign policy, and one expects that they will stick to that. And like I said before, that is good for the international system because it provides an avenue for the global system to have countries that parties in conflict can trust, so that when they present, documents, peace proposals, there will be both sides, or there are many sides. The sides to the conflict will be comfortable to see that document in a positive light. Just take, for instance, the peace proposal that China presented a couple of days ago. I mean, when you look at that peace proposal, the Ukrainian side, of course, does not trust it, does not believe it, will not accept it, because it comes from a country so close to Russia. And when you look at the content of the peace proposal, you see that it is, extremely pro-Russia. So that even if Russia has to draw up a peace proposal, it won't be any different from what China has presented. Those are the kind of peace proposals that countries will be interested in embracing, because of the fact that Russia and China are close, are allies. But a country like Switzerland that is more than you, Ukraine will be more comfortable to trust, whatever it brings. Russia too will be more comfortable to trust whatever it brings. So countries like that global system to maintain global peace and stability.
Russia seems to be ramping up its nuclear threat rhetoric with the latest statements from the Secretary of the Russian Security Council, Nikolai Patrushev, who says that they have the capability to destroy any enemy, including the United States. Now that we've got to this juncture, about 14 months after the war has begun, it doesn't seem that the rhetoric is being tempered in any way. Are you concerned?
Of course I'm concerned, and everybody should be concerned, because we all know that should a nuclear war break out, there is a possibility of the obliteration of life on planet Earth. The rhetoric is so disappointing. We do not expect that the leader of a great power like Russia, will be engaged in that kind of rhetoric. To begin to talk about possibility of using nuclear weapons, the possibility of going to install some nuclear, infrastructure in some countries to be able to threaten, the stability of the global system is very, very disappointing. But we are where we are. That is what Putin is doing and is saying. The world should be concerned. Nobody should dismiss what he's saying that, it's not possible, because a nuclear war would also affect, of course, almost wipe out all Russians too. That is just one thing that the global system is hanging on, that no nuclear power want to use nuclear weapons because both the one attacked and the one attacking will perish. I mean, that is what, optimism is being anchored upon. But we also know that in the global system we have had leaders that acted extremely irrationally. And Putin, could well be in that bracket, in that category. So it should not be dismissed. What can be done to ensure that the rhetoric remains just rhetoric will be encouraged. And like we have said several times, the focus now should be on the presentation of peace plans that can be amended one way or the other, that will help to bring this conflict to an end. But the rhetoric is disappointing, but it should be taken seriously.
To your point, Professor, that it should not be dismissed, that seems to be the opposite sentiment in Ukraine, who are saying that it's not the first time he's been threatening, and he's going to continue to do that. And these are scare tactics. We have officials from Ukraine saying that. But going forward, we know that it's in the foreseeable future, using nuclear weapons is highly unrealistic and the most extreme measure that could ever be taken by any country. And therefore, one can come to a conclusion that these are just threats. He's never really going to do it. But do the Ukrainians and the allies of Ukraine have the responsibility of being more circumspect towards President Putin and Russia, not because they're trying to concede or agree with him, but as it were, just trying to temper the tension?
Yes, Putin will not likely do it. No sensible person will start a war in which he will not survive and his compatriots will not perish. So it is understandable that the other side thinks it's just, scaremongering and just noise making. That is likely. So it should not be dismissed, really. It should not be taken as some just noise making. It should be taken seriously, despite the fact that we know that Putin will not likely do it.
Professor, now concerning mediation, okay, we just have to leave it there. Thank you so much, Professor, for speaking with us on our special coverage of Russian invasion. Professor David Aworawo, the head of the Department History and Strategic Studies, University of Lagos. Thank you for your time this morning.
Thanks so very much for having me on the program.
Now, Taiwan's ex-president became the first sitting or former Taiwanese leader to visit mainland China since the Communist Revolution in 1949, saying he hopes to bring about peace and improve relations. He was met at Shanghai's Pudong Airport by officials, including Chen Yongfeng, deputy head of China's Taiwan Affairs Office. The visit has been criticized by the ruling Democratic Progressive Party of Ma's successor, Tsai Ing-wen. The trip comes at a time of heightened tension between Beijing and Taipei as China keeps up military and political pressure to try and get democratic Taiwan to accept Chinese sovereignty. And when we return, attempt to block Ukraine and its allies strive to block Russian and Belarusian athletes from Olympic competitions. Details in a moment. Please stay with us. Welcome back. A giant recruitment advert for Russia's Wagner mercenary forces could be seen on the facade of an office building next to a highway in northeast Moscow. The advert, which covers 17 stories, shows the group's logo and slogans such as "Join the winning team" and "Together we will win again," or rather, "Together we will win," along with a picture of a masked man holding a weapon. Wagner, which fights alongside Russian forces in eastern Ukraine, has sought to replenish troop numbers ahead of a potential Ukrainian counteroffensive. The group is thought to have sustained heavy losses as it battles for control of the eastern Ukrainian city of Bakhmut in what has become the longest, bloodiest battle of the war. Its boss, Yevgeny Prigozhin, a 61-year-old ex-convict whose company grew wealthy by catering events and fulfilling contracts for the Kremlin and government ministries, said earlier in March that he aims to recruit 30,000 new fighters by mid-May. For the business side of things, my colleague and business correspondent, Ini John Mekwa, joins us this morning. Again, good to see you.
Good to see you.
The World Bank has warned the world will be a lost decade. For those who are even suspicious of the World Bank's motives in granting funds to countries, what should we make of this?
Yeah, well, it's just saying that it's a dangerous time for the world. So we need to remember that the world has still not fully recovered from the pandemic that devastated economies and stopped. I mean, even China, we're still talking about how they just called off their strict COVID-19 rules, which of course stopped production. And when there's no production, that means the economy is not moving, GDP is not there, there's nothing to export, and so you don't have revenue as a country. You know, so with the war now, that has also changed a whole lot of things, the war going on in Ukraine. For one, talk about disruption when it comes to the Black Sea, when it comes to export of grain. We've seen a whole lot of countries redefine their trade partners, redefine their logistics and their exports because of this war. We've seen countries lose billions. I mean, the other day we were talking about how Russia was flaring its gas because of the sanction. Countries do not want to associate with them or buy their gas, so they had to flare it and waste it. And this is something that is in need in other countries. So what this has done, yesterday we talked about how Germany was on strike, how the workers and transport units were on strike because of inflation. Last week we saw inflation come out of the UK. It went from 10.1 to 10.4. And this, I mean, the Prime Minister was expecting that it to go to 2%. A lot of people talked against Prime Minister Rishi Sunak because of his expectations that were not met. In Nigeria, we have inflation at 21.91%. Food inflation is also there, and it doesn't look like it's going down. So what the World Bank is saying that all of these macroeconomic indices just indicate that the world is not growing as it ought to. Growth is stunted, and there's even risks. You know, we've seen more people get poor. We've seen, for instance, some Russians leaving Russia. We've seen Ukrainians leaving Ukraine to become refugees. So these are people whose status have changed. And all of this feed into the world economy or the numbers of the world at the end of the day. And when at the close of the year, there's a project, no, not projection, but there's when we look at the rare of the year, then we see, oh, the world did not grow at this pace. It grows at this pace because, I mean, they had projected that there will be global economy will grow at about more than 3%, but now they placed it at 2.2%. So that's a loss for the world. But of course, it also translates to a loss for individuals who make up the world. You know, so that's just what the World Bank is saying.
Do they have a role they can play to help countries and nations?
Well, I guess the best they can do as World Bank is to give assistance, like as you mentioned at the beginning, that they give loans, you know, to countries. And I know that, was it the World Bank or IMF just last week, they approved a loan that they want to give to Ukraine, and they had to do some compromise because, I mean, a country at war, you cannot expect that they'll be able to pay back as they should, you know. So there was some compromise that had to be put in place for them to qualify for that. So that's the best they can do. But I guess the best thing would just be if the war ended and economy started recovering, because the world was recovering from the pandemic before we had the war that has now changed a whole lot of things.
So secondly, is bread going to be more available? whether normal bread or unleavened bread, because wheat prices are dropping.
Olumide, you love bread so much.
Well, actually, I do. Who doesn't?
Okay, well, wheat prices have dropped because, for instance, a country like Europe and all of that, they have their wheat, but the black seed grain deal, you know, is supposed to make grain available, especially to the African countries at cheaper rates and all of that. But you have also countries that are losing from this, because if it is cheaper, that means that a country's revenue is now lower than what they expected it to be.
But will they be losing money?
They'll be losing money, because if they were supposed to sell for $1, for instance, and it's now less than $1, it means the revenue coming from that. Already we have farmers around Europe, you know, apart from Ukraine, because they're giving priority to Ukraine to help it recover from the war, you know. But farmers are in Europe, in Poland and Hungary and all of that, they are losing now because they are not selling as high as they used to. That means their income is lower. And that, of course, will feed into the country. So it's cheaper because of the Black Sea grain deal, which is supposed to, you know, make grains available and focus on, especially on Ukraine grain. But it's not good news on all sides. And I don't know how it gets to Nigeria, Olumide,
you know, bread has been so expensive in Nigeria lately.
Cassava. We need to eat cassava bread.
Cassava, Ini?
Yes.
Cassava bread?
Yes.
Okay.
Let's eat our own.
Does it taste as good as...
You've not tasted it before?
No, not really.
You need to taste it.
Okay, good. I've learned something. I'm going to look out for it the next supermarket I go to. All
right.
Thank you, Ini.
Thank you for having me.
And business news takes off after this program. In the meantime, Ukraine, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, and Poland have issued a joint statement calling for the International Olympic Committee to refrain from allowing Russian and Belarusian athletes to compete in the 2024 Games in Paris. A statement reads, "There exists not a single reason to move away from the exclusion regime for Russian and Belarusian athletes set by the IOC more than a year ago, immediately after the start of Russia's full-scale invasion into Ukraine." It says, "We strongly believe that now is not the time to consider the opening up of a pathway for Russian and Belarusian athletes to return to the Olympic Games in any status." Ukrainian Foreign Minister Dmytro Kuleba also posted on Twitter, "Russian and Belarusian athletes shall not participate in international sports competitions. I urge all states to back this call. Keep the doors of sports shut for Russia's war with propaganda." And that's where we leave it for this edition of our special coverage of Russian invasion. Thank you for watching. Have a good day. See you again.